Hey guys, here are notes for factoring trinomials when a is equal to 1, and it's our second day of factoring notes. So I first of all want to start off with the idea of what a trinomial is in our form ax squared plus bx plus c. And what we're going to be noticing is that there are three terms and there are coefficients and a and b and a constant c. So those are our coefficients and here's our constant c. And the a, b, and c's, like in our previous unit, are going to help us out to know what's going on. I'm going to write down a couple of trinomials, a few trinomials, just so that you guys can review what a, b, and c are. So I'm just making something up. It's not on your sheet. But we'll see what's going on. So our coefficient of x squared is 7, and 7 is our value for a. So we've got a equals 7, and then we've got the x term, and that has a b in front of it. So b is equal to -9. So we're going to keep the sign that's also associated with the coefficient or the constant. And our value for c for this one, our constant, doesn't have any letter with it. It is a positive 10. Okay, so that's one where we did ABCs, and again, this is just a quick little review of what we did last unit. And let's see if we've got a problem, a trinomial that looks like this. Okay, so this is also a trinomial, and there is an a, a b, and a c. Our a value is always going to be the coefficient that's in front of the squared term. So our value for a, I'm going to look at the squared term, which is actually the last one in this row, and I'm noticing there's a negative sign in front. So a in this situation is negative, and then I have to put a number down, so I'm going to be thinking about what's implied. That's a -1, so you could think of there as being a -1 in front of that x squared. B is always the term, is always the value associated with the term whose exponent is a 1. So in this situation, our b value is -13. So again, I'm keeping the sign that's in front. Our c value is the constant. That's the term that doesn't have a variable behind it. C in this case is 12. So that's just a little reminder of how we figure out our ABCs, because we're going to be needing our ABCs to work on our factoring. Okay, so our next thing we're going to do is what Delta Math calls the X game. And this is finding factors of A times C, which add up to whatever B is. So this is where we need to know our ABCs. So in problem 1, the number that is in front of the x squared is an implied 1. So a is equal to 1. B is going to be in front of the term which has x to the first power, so b is equal to 8. And c is the constant. C is equal to 12. So I've got to do a times c. So I'm going to be thinking 1 times 12 in this problem, and that's a 12. And then I need to add up to b. B in this problem is 8. So I need to think about ways that multiply to 12, which would also add to 8. So we're going to be thinking for a little bit. So we need to think about factors of 12. So those are going to be ways to multiply up to 12. So ways that multiply to 12 are things like 1 times 12, 2 times 6, and 3 times 4. And then I need to add to b. And when I figure out my add to b, along with that, I'm going to be thinking about the signs. So, did you guys notice that the 12 that we multiplied to is positive? That means that when we do our adding, we have same signs. And it's going to be positive, because the b value is positive. So now I'm going to go through and I'm going to think about what is 1 plus 12. That's 13. That's not 8, so I'm not going to use that. I'm going to think about 2 plus 6. That's 8, and if I kept going, I could think 3 plus 4. That's 7. So the situation that I'm going to be using in this problem is going to be the 2 and the 6. 2 times 6 is 12, and 2 plus 6 is 8. So that is going to be the structure that I'm going to use. So I'm multiplying to 12 and I'm adding to 8, and the factors that make that happen are 2 times 6 and 2 plus 6. Okay, in problem 2, A is equal to 1, B is equal to negative 19, and C is equal to 18. So first thing I've got to do is A times C. So when I do A times C, I've got to do 1 times 18. Okay, the 18 is a positive value, so that tells me that I've got same signs. So when I write down the values that solve this x game, I am going to be having the same signs. Okay, now let's look at our add-up number. So our add-up number on this one is B, and that is a negative 19. Okay, so please notice that's a negative 19. So B is negative. So I've got same signs and negative, so I need to have 2 negative symbols when I write down my answers. Okay, so we've done a little bit of our thinking, and now let's think a little bit more. So I'm going to be thinking factors of 18. So ways to multiply to 18 are 1 times 18, 2 times 9, and 3 times 6. Because of the thinking that we've already done, we know that both of these should be negative. So I've got negative 1 and negative 18, negative 2, negative 9, negative 6, negative 3. And now I need to think about by adding up. So I need to add to negative 19. So now I'm going to be thinking adding. So I'm thinking negative 1 plus negative 18. That's negative 19. I could go through the rest of them if I wanted to, but that one's the one that works, right? So the line that works for us in this one is the one that uses the negative 1 and the negative 18. So negative 1 times negative 18 is positive 18, and negative 1 plus negative 18 is negative 19. So that would be what would work for our game. Okay, let's do problem 3. A is equal to 1, B is equal to negative 1, C is equal to negative 20. A times C, so I'm going to think 1 times negative 20, and my B value is negative 1. So now we're going to think for a second. This is the first time when our AC has been negative. So when AC is negative, that means I've got opposite signs. B is negative, so that means that the larger one is negative. So when I'm thinking through this, remember there's going to be two numbers that multiply together to make negative 20, and whichever one of those digits that we figure out is the larger one, that's the one that gets the negative sign. So let's think through this. So we're doing factors. These are ways to multiply to negative 20. So our factors for negative 20 are 1 times 20, 2 times 10, 4 times 5. So in each of those pairs, pairs of values that multiply to 20, I'm going to make whichever of those is larger the negative number. So between 1 and 20, 20 is larger, it gets the negative in this problem. 10 gets the negative, and 5 gets the negative. and that affects my add up number, so that's why I'm paying attention to the signs. So now I'm going to add to -1. So -1 plus 1 plus -20 is -19. 2 plus -10 is -8. 4 plus -5 is equal to -1. So that last line is the one that I need to use for this problem. Okay, so when I do my factoring, I'll be using the 4 and the -5. All right, our last set that we're going through is x squared plus 4x minus 21. So there are my ABCs. Now I'm going to multiply a times c, 1 times -21. And my add up value is a 4 because b is 4. So my AC is negative, so I have a negative a times c, so that means opposite signs. On this problem, b is a positive, so that means the larger is positive. Okay, now let's do our factors. So our factors for -21, ways to multiply to -21 are going to be 1 times 21 and 3 times 7. The larger one is supposed to be positive, so I need a positive 21, a positive 7. So that means that in order to get to the -21, that means the smaller of those two is going to be the negative. Now let's add to 4, and let's see which one is going to work. So I'm thinking -1 plus 21, that's a positive 20, that's not it. -3 plus 7, that's a positive 4, that's the one that I need. So I've got a -3 and a 7. Our goal is that you practice this, and we've got some of the Delta Math problems to help you out with that, to get some practice. And our goal is that the stuff that I've written down in the tables ends up being mental math. And maybe you'll just use the big X as an organizational structure. So now let's apply this to actual factoring. So when we factor our problems, we're going to do the X game. We're going to find our factors of AC which add to B, and then we're going to write our factors on one line, and we're going to have those factors inside parentheses. So I'm going to start off by doing my big X structure. We did a times right there and a plus right there. We need to know our ABCs. In 5, A is equal to 1, B is equal to 7, and C is equal to 6. A times C, I'm going to think 1 times 6, and I need to add to 7, because that's B. Now we're going to do our thinking. So I need to think factors of 6. So ways to multiply to 6. Let's think through that. So I've got 1 times 6 and 2 times 3. Okay, we're going to check on our sign for AC to let us know a little bit about our adding. So AC is positive. So that means we've got same signs. Okay, so now we're going to have our adding. So we need to add to 7. So I'm going to think 1 plus 6, that's it, isn't it? And 2 plus 3. So I'm writing down the other one just so that you guys can see why the other ones aren't it. So I've got 1 times 6 is 6, 1 plus 6 is 7. So that's the combination that works. Now to do the factoring, so we've done part 1 now we're doing part 2. Write each factor on one line inside parentheses. So I'm going to have a set of parentheses. There's one set and two sets. The first value that was going to work for us for this combination is going to be the 1. So I'm going to write down the factor that matches, which is x plus 1. The other combination that worked was a 6, so I need to write down that as a factor, x plus 6. And that's the factoring. So the factoring is the stuff that's in parentheses in red in this case. All right, let's do our next one. A equals 1, B equals negative 8, C equals 16. Okay, so now I'm going to multiply A and C together to get my AC value. So I'm doing 1 times 16. And then I'm going to add up to B. My B is negative 8 in this problem. And now we're going to think. And again, because you guys are more listening to this, I'm writing it all down. But you may not need to write all of this stuff down. So I need to think factors of 16. So I'm thinking about ways to multiply to 16. That's 1 times 16. And that's also going to be 2 times 8 and 4 times 4. All right, the 16 that we're multiplying to was a positive. So we have a positive AC, and that means same signs. B is negative. So I need both negative. So as I go through my factors, I need negatives for each of the pairs. All right, now let's do our add up. So we need to add to negative 8. So I've got negative 1 plus negative 16, that's negative 17. That's not it. Negative 2 plus negative 8, that's negative 10. That's not it. Negative 4 plus negative 4, that's negative 8. That's the one that we need for this problem. And again, everything that I've done in problem 6 right now, that could have been mental math. So as you gain practice, you're not going to need to write down a whole lot of stuff. All right, since we found our magic combination, our combination that's going to work, now we can write down our factors. So one of the factors was negative 4, so I'm going to have the factor x minus 4. The other value in our magic combination was a negative 4, so I'm going to have another x minus 4. It's okay to have two factors that are exactly the same, and just whatever you get for these two, when you're doing your trinomials, you need to have two factors that match. All right, moving on to 7. So our ABCs, A is 1, B is negative 1, C is negative 6. So I'm going to do 1 times negative 6. My value for B is negative 1. Now let's think through how that's going to work out. So starting off with factors of negative 6, ways to multiply to 6 are going to be 1 times 6 and 2 times 3. Okay, let's think through our signs. The AC value was negative. And what that means, so we have a negative AC, so that means opposite signs. Our B value was negative. So that means the larger is negative. So when I look at these ways to multiply to 6, whichever one of those digits is the larger value, that's the one that gets the negative. So the larger of those keeps the sign when we have a negative AC. So now we're going to add to negative 1. Negative 1 plus negative 6 is negative 5. That's not it. 2 plus negative 3 is negative 1. That's the one that we need for our situation, for our original expression. Okay, there were two values that I wrote down. So the factors of AC which add up to B are 2 and negative 3. So I'm going to have two different factors. The first factor comes from using that positive 2. So I need to write down x plus 2. The second factor comes from the negative 3, so I need to write down x minus 3. And those two sets of parentheses right next door to each other in red, those are my factors. Okay, our next one, problem 8, same process. Our AC is going to be 1 times negative 6. So again, A was equal to 1, B was equal to 5, C is equal to negative 6. Our add up value is B, which is 5 in this case. Alright, so let's go through and start thinking about ways to multiply to negative 6. So that's going to again be 1 times 6 and 2 times 3. Now we're going to think about the positive negatives. So AC was negative, so that means opposite signs. B is positive, so that means the larger is positive. So when I look through these ways to multiply to the negative 6, the larger one needs to match B's sign. And that means the smaller is going to get that negative sign. Because again, we're trying to multiply to a negative 6, so we have to have one positive and one negative. Now let's do our add up. So we're going to be thinking negative 1 plus 6, that's 5, that's it. I'm going to write down the other one just so you guys can see why the other one is not it. So negative 2 plus 3 is positive 1. That's not what we needed. So we need a negative 1 and a 6. So our factors of AC which add up to B are negative 1 and 6. We're going to create two factors from that. The first factor comes from the negative 1. So I'm going to have to write down x minus 1. The second factor comes from our positive 6. So I'm going to have to write down x plus 6. Okay, so that's a quick little set of examples for doing your factoring of trinomials. And the next part is a more complicated or kind of an extension. Alright, so if we're factoring more complex trinomials, we are going to always look for a GCF first, and then we're going to check the parentheses to see if we can factor any further. And for these two problems, both of them are going to factor further. So we're reviewing a little bit from our first day, and we are also doing the trinomials to get an extra example. So the first thing I'm going to do in problem 9 is I'm going to look for a GCF. So I'm looking at all three terms, and so here's one term, there's my second term, here's my third term. When I look at all three of those terms, I notice that 5, 30, and 40 are all divisible by 5. So I'm thinking that there's a GCF here. I know that 5 goes into 5, 30, and 40. The other thing that I notice about every single term is that every single term has a y as part of it. Do you guys notice there's a y for every single one of them? So that gives me a clue that I need to have a y. So we're going to start off with taking out 5y and writing our answer inside of the parentheses. So this is review of what we did last time. So I'm going to write down what we're thinking, but this isn't really part of our notation. It's just our thinking process. So I'm thinking in my mind 5x squared y divided by 5y. And what ends up happening is the 5's cancel out and the y's cancel out. So I'm left over with an x squared. The next part that I'm thinking is I'm thinking 30xy divided by 5y. So 30 divided by 5 is a positive 6. The x stays, and y divided by y is 1, so I don't have to write that down, because 1 times anything is what you started with. The third part that I'm thinking is I'm thinking 40y divided by 5y. So 40 divided by 5 is 8, and the y's would simplify to 1. Y divided by y is 1. So I'm going to be done with just the 8. I don't have to have a letter after that. Okay, now I'm going to look inside my parentheses. So inside the parentheses, I notice there's a trinomial. And in that trinomial, a is equal to 1, b is equal to 6, and c is equal to 8. So I'm going to think about my x game. So I need to multiply to AC and add up to b. A times c is 8, b is 6. So factors of 8 are going to be 1 times 8 and 2 times 4. 1 times 8, 2 times 4. Now I'm going to add those together. 1 plus 8, that's 9. That's not it. 2 plus 4, that's 6. Yeah, that's the one that I need. Okay, so factors of 8, which add up to 6, are 2 times 4. So 2 times 4 is 8, and 2 plus 4 is 6. Alright, I've got everything all ready for my factoring now. So from the information we got from our x, we end up having two factors. So 2 is one of our values, so our factor is x plus 2. 4 is the other value, so we're going to have a factor that's x plus 4. The last part that you need to write down is the GCF that you took at the very beginning. So the 5y needs to be included right in front of those parentheses, and then you have a completely factored expression. Okay, let's look at problem 10, please. So in problem 10, I'm going to look for a GCF before I try to do any other factoring. So I'm thinking about 4, 12, and 40. And I'm noticing that our GCF in this problem is a 4 because 4 divides into 4, 4 divides into 12, 4 divides into 40. So we're going to put a 4 outside a set of parentheses, and now we're going to do our dividing. So what we're thinking about when we're doing that dividing, and again, you don't have to write it down, but I'm just going to write down what we've got. So I'm thinking 4x squared is 4 times x, and I'm going to divide it by 4. Do you notice 4 divided by 4 is 1? That simplifies. I'm left over with an x squared. The next part I'm going to think about is I'm going to think about negative 12x divided by 4. Negative 12 divided by 4 is negative 3, and I don't have any x's that cancel out, so I've got a negative 3x. The last part that I'm going to be thinking about is doing negative 40 divided by 4. Negative 40 divided by 4 is negative 10. 40 didn't have any x's after it, so I don't have any x's left over. So that was what I was doing with mental math, and I just wrote down what I was thinking on the side. Alright, now I'm noticing inside the parentheses we have a trinomial. We've got an a value of 1, a b value of negative 3, and a c value of negative 10. So I'm going to be thinking through our process. So we want to multiply to AC, and add to b. So a times c in this problem is negative 10, and b is negative 3. So I'm noticing AC is negative, so I know I've got opposite signs. Again, that's because AC is negative. And b is negative 3, so I know that the larger is negative. So I'm going to keep that in mind while I'm thinking through. Okay, now let's do our thinking. So I'm going to think about ways to multiply to 10. So my ways to multiply to 10 are 1 times 10, and 2 times 5. The larger needs to be negative, so I'm going to go through, and on the larger of those values, I'm going to put a negative down. Now I'm going to think add to negative 3. So I'm thinking 1 plus negative 10, that's negative 9, that's not the one I need. And I'm also going to be thinking 2 plus negative 5, that's negative 3, that's the one that I need. So I need to have 2 times negative 5. Okay, so my trinomial is going to be able to factor because I found factors of AC which add up to B. Those were 2 and negative 5, because 2 times negative 5 is negative 10. 2 plus negative 5 is negative 3. So now I'm going to create my two factors. 2 is one of my values, so I need an x plus 2. Negative 5 was another value, so I need x minus 5. And then from the beginning, I'm remembering that we had a GCF, and the GCF should go in front of your set of parentheses. Okay, so there's some practice that you guys can do. There's also a Delta Math that you can do. And please spend some time working on this, and thanks so much, and have a great day.